Something important is unfolding inside the Pittsburgh Steelers organization right now, and if you really pay attention to the details, you start to see a very calculated approach taking shape as the 2026 offseason officially gets underway. Phase 1 of the offseason program has begun, and while this part of the calendar doesn't involve actual football on the field, it still gives us a very clear picture of where things stand internally. All the key veterans showed up. We're talking about leaders like TJ Watt, Alex Highsmith, Cam Hayward, Joey Porter Jr., and others being present on day one, stepping into what is now a completely new era under head coach Mike McCarthy. That alone already signals buy-in from the locker room. A new coaching staff always brings uncertainty, but the early participation from core players tells you this team is aligned and ready to embrace the transition. But at the same time, there's one name that continues to dominate the conversation, and that's Aaron Rodgers. He wasn't there, and honestly, that shouldn't surprise anyone who has followed his career. Not only is he not under contract yet, which technically prevents him from participating, but historically, Rodgers has never put much value on this specific phase of the offseason. This stage is strictly meetings, conditioning, and playbook installation. No real football, no competitive reps. And for a quarterback entering year 22, widely considered one of the smartest to ever play the position, this part of the process simply isn't where he feels he needs to be. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Despite public comments from within the organization suggesting they didn't want to wait as long as they did last year, the reality behind the scenes tells a different story. According to what's being discussed around the league, there is no real deadline. The Steelers would like clarity before the draft, yes, but they're also prepared to wait if necessary. That alone tells you how confident they are that Rodgers is ultimately going to be their guy in 2026. And the locker room, they've already been through this before. Last year, they waited deep into the offseason, and by the time Rodgers arrived, he quickly established himself as a leader. In fact, it's been indicated that players inside that locker room want him back. That matters. That's not speculation, that's a reflection of the respect he earned over the course of the season. So when you look at the current situation, it's not being viewed internally as a problem. It's more of a timing issue than anything else. And if you start connecting the dots, there's a very realistic window where this all comes together. The Steelers begin actual on-field work during their voluntary minicamp from April 20th to April 22nd, just days before the NFL draft. That's when things shift from meetings to real football activity, 7-on-7 drills, install execution, building chemistry on the field. That's the type of environment Rodgers typically values. There's a growing belief that his decision, and potentially his signing, could come shortly before that minicamp window. Somewhere in mid-April, it would make perfect sense. He arrives, signs, participates in meaningful reps, establishes himself with the new coaching staff, and sets the tone heading into the draft. Now, while all of this is developing on the quarterback side, the front office is actively shaping the roster around that expectation. And one of the most revealing areas right now is at wide receiver. The Steelers have been extremely active in their top 30 visits, and one name that stands out above the rest is Denzel Boston out of Washington. He's not just another prospect, they brought him in on the same day the offseason program started, which is not random. Timing like that matters. It reflects priority and intent. When you look deeper, Boston is currently one of the few prospects who checks multiple key boxes for Pittsburgh. He's had both a formal combine meeting and a top 30 visit, something only a handful of players in this class can say so far. And among that group, he's the only one widely projected as a first-round pick. That tells you something very important. The Steelers are seriously evaluating him as a potential option at pick 21. Now here's where the conversation gets more complex, because on the surface, drafting another big-bodied receiver might not seem like the obvious move. You already have DK Metcalf and Michael Pittman Jr., two physical, versatile receivers who can line up inside and outside. The common expectation would be to target a smaller, quicker slot receiver to balance the room. But if you really understand what Mike McCarthy wants to build offensively, the idea of adding another player like Boston starts to make a lot more sense. McCarthy has been very clear about valuing versatility. He wants receivers who can line up at X, Z, and in the slot. He wants physical players who can block, win one-on-one matchups, and handle the physical nature of AFC North football. Boston fits that mold. He's a vertical threat, a strong contested catch receiver, and someone who can stretch the field while also bringing size and toughness. And when you start projecting how the pieces could fit together, it opens up different possibilities. Pittman could take on a larger role in the slot where his route running, physical physicality and experience could thrive. Metcalf continues as the primary vertical and YAC threat. Boston adds another outside presence with elite ball-winning ability. Then you have Roman Wilson, who may finally be used correctly as a true slot receiver after being miscast on the outside last season. His skill set naturally fits inside, and this new structure could unlock his potential. And the key part, the Steelers still have the flexibility to add a smaller, faster receiver later in the draft. They have 12 picks, including 5 in the top 100. They are not locked into one approach, they're building layers. So what you're seeing right now isn't just random offseason activity, it's a coordinated plan, a team that appears to be positioning itself for a specific quarterback, while simultaneously building a receiver group that aligns with a new offensive identity. And when you step back and look at everything, the patience with Rodgers, the confidence from the locker room, the timing of offseason phases, and the clear focus on versatile physical receivers, it really starts to feel like the Steelers already know exactly where this is heading. The only thing left is when it becomes official. So let me ask you this. If Aaron Rodgers does sign right before minicamp and the Steelers follow that up by drafting a player like Denzel Boston in the first round, do you believe this offense instantly becomes one of the most dangerous units in the AFC? Or do you still think they're missing a key piece? And that's where things start to get even more fascinating, because once you accept the idea that Pittsburgh is quietly building this offense around Aaron Rodgers, the next layer of the plan becomes much clearer and honestly much more aggressive than people might expect. Because while Denzel Boston is getting a lot of attention as a potential first-round option, he's not the only receiver the Steelers are seriously evaluating. There's another name that keeps showing up in all the right places, and that's Jeremy Bernard out of Alabama. And if you really study what the Steelers have done so far, Bernard might actually be one of the most important pieces in this entire draft strategy. He's one of the very few players who has both a formal combine meeting and a top 30 visit with Pittsburgh. That's not Sluche. It's a strong indicator of genuine interest. Teams don't invest that kind of time unless they see a clear fit. And when you turn on the film, you start to understand exactly why. Bernard is the type of receiver that quarterbacks love, not just because of athletic ability, but because of trust. He runs routes with precision, with timing, with an understanding of how to get open within the structure of a play. He doesn't just run routes. He reads defenses, adjusts tempo, and consistently finds soft spots exactly when the quarterback needs him to be there. And if there's one thing we know about Aaron Rodgers, it's that he demands that level of detail from his receivers. That's actually one of the biggest reasons why certain players struggled to stay on the field last season. It wasn't always about talent. It was about execution, about being in the right place at the right time, about earning the quarterback's confidence. And Bernard already plays the game like a seasoned pro in that regard. What also makes him even more intriguing is that the concerns about his athleticism don't really hold up anymore. He tested extremely well, a relative athletic score above 9, a 4.48 in the 40-yard dash, solid explosiveness numbers. This is not a limited athlete. This is a complete receiver who combines physical tools with high-level football intelligence. So now think about the possibilities. Let's say the Steelers go with Denzel Boston in round 1. They add size, physicality, and a dominant presence on the outside. Then in round 2, they come back and take a player like Jeremy Bernard. Now you're adding a technician, someone who can play inside and outside, someone who can immediately earn Rodgers' trust. At that point, you're not just filling positions, you're building a system where every receiver has a defined role, but also the versatility to move around, a system where matchups become a nightmare for defenses because you can shift players across formations without losing effectiveness, a system where your quarterback has multiple reliable options, not just physically, but mentally. And this is where the presence of Michael Pittman Jr. becomes even more valuable, because his versatility allows Pittsburgh to truly take the best player available at wide receiver, regardless of archetype. If it's a big-bodied outside threat, he can shift inside. If it's a slot-heavy player, he can move outside. That flexibility gives the front office freedom, and right now, they're using it. At the same time, don't overlook the depth strategy here. The Steelers aren't just focused on the top of the draft. They understand they can still add speed and explosiveness later. Players with true slot ability, guys who bring that juice to the offense, are expected to be available in the middle rounds. And with the number of picks Pittsburgh holds, they're in a perfect position to double down at the position. So you could realistically see a scenario where they walk away from this draft with 2 or even 3 wide receivers, each bringing something different to the table, and suddenly the narrative changes completely. Instead of asking whether the Steelers have enough weapons, you're asking how defenses are supposed to match up with them, because now you're talking about DK Metcalf stretching the field, Michael Pittman Jr. controlling the middle, Denzel Boston winning contested balls on the outside, Jeremy Bernard moving the chains with precision, and Roman Wilson finally operating in his natural role in the slot. Add in a young, fast receiver from the later rounds, and you've got layers of depth that can attack defenses in multiple ways. That's not just a solid receiver room, that's a strategic build designed for a specific quarterback. And that brings everything full circle back to Aaron Rodgers, because if this is the direction Pittsburgh is going, it tells you they're not just hoping he signs, they're planning as if he already has. They're building an offense tailored to his strengths. Timing routes, versatility, trust-based concepts, physical receivers who can win one-on-one when plays break down. These are not random decisions. These are calculated moves that align perfectly with the type of quarterback Rodgers has been throughout his career. So now the question isn't just when he signs, it's what happens immediately after he does. Because if he walks into a situation where the roster has been carefully constructed to fit his style, where the coaching staff is aligned with that vision, and where the locker room already supports his return, then expectations are going to rise very quickly, and not just internally, but across the entire AFC. So as all of this continues to unfold, I want to hear from you. Are the Steelers making the right call by building patience around Rodgers while aggressively reshaping the offense through the draft? Or do you think this entire plan is taking too big of a risk heading into 2026? And the more you analyze this approach, the more it starts to feel like the Steelers are threading a very fine needle between urgency and long-term vision. And that's not easy to pull off in today's NFL. Because let's be honest for a second, building around a quarterback like Aaron Rodgers at this stage of his career is not a long-term play. It's a window, a very specific short-term window where everything has to align almost perfectly. Coaching, personnel, chemistry, health. There's very little margin for error, and yet Pittsburgh doesn't look like a team acting out of desperation. They look calculated, controlled, almost patient to a fault, and that's what makes this so intriguing.